We do have a question about how people have generally reacted slash responded to the fact that you have cerebral palsy.
Have fun.
So if you guys want to go a bit into that, do you have things to say about that?
Most times people like in passing won't necessarily like notice enough. Like sometimes I'll get random stares, but like it's nothing super hard. But sometimes people are just very bold and decide to like walk up to me and be like, "Hi,
Hmm.
I see something's like wrong with your arm or whatever." Like I don't know, or just like oh like what's your disability? Like they just like are bold enough to say that, and it's
Yeah.
interesting. I remember like last year I was leaving a movie theater and this guy like stopped me for 10 minutes and just like asked me all these questions, and it always kind of like ends in the narrative of like one they mention somebody that they know who
Mm.
also has a disability. So they're like, oh yeah, like my I don't know, like my friend has something like that. I
Hmm.
totally understand. Like,
Frustrating, I'm sure.
and then they mention that, and then it ends with this like whenever I keep answering their questions, and it's not like I'm putting myself down in any way, but they somehow just feel the need to say like, oh, I'm sorry, or like, oh wow,
Hmm.
like you've really struggled, or like you've really like gotten far. Like it's just like that kind of narrative.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
but recently, as I've like entered the dating scene as a young person in college, I a lot of us are obviously like on online apps, whatever. Like, and I am now in a relationship, so it's not really a problem right now. But
Hmm.
I just like there's always that question of like, do you disclose your disability,
Hmm.
and when do you do so, et cetera, et
Hmm.
cetera. And honestly, for a while, I just like wouldn't ever unless they asked, because like I just really couldn't. One like I in my mind I was like, okay, so if they don't even notice, then should I even tell them?
Hmm. Hmm.
And, but then that's also like putting it on them, and like how do you as like a person who's interested in this like in this person like bring that up, like because you
Hmm.
wouldn't want to know obviously. And like my current partner, like they didn't necessarily even ask about it until like we were actually like in the end of the dating, like let's be in a relationship, like they like waited
Hmm.
that long. So like it was just like it's just this odd thing, especially for me, since I am very like I'm not in a wheelchair and it's not as visual of a disability. It's kind of this like odd thing of like I'll just like stand on this side of you while we're walking so you don't have to like see my right hand or something. Like
Hmm.
that's just, I just like there's all these like scenarios that go in to like me getting ready for a date where like how am I just like I don't really want to talk about this right now.
Hmm.
Like how do I hide it enough to make them not notice just because it's like an awkward thing.
Hmm.
But that's that's how people react.
Usually it's positive, like inspiration-y kind of reactions. The
Hmm.
one that comes to mind most clearly at the moment was I was coming out of the UCLA Blood and Platelet Center after trying to donate. And this woman who was going to a shop nearby like came up to help me like hold the door for me, which was really nice of her. And then said something like, "You're a rock star," and I'm like, "Thanks." And like, and
For existing.
yeah, and I guess I've trained myself over time to appreciate when people are doing these positive things. I tell people that they say words like inspiration not necessarily as a way to be condescending or negative, but as really a lack of a better term. And so in my mind, I process it as I I appreciate what you do and like the struggles that I know you go through,
Hmm.
instead of like, oh, you're living a tragic life and oh, your life must be so hard. So I process it in a very positive way. And I think that's from years of kind of trying to train myself to do that. Because in my mind, a comment like that is a really positive thing because maybe I am having a real struggle that day, or maybe
Right.
like, hearing the positivity is helpful. And I think if everyone in the ability community was too afraid to say anything, it would be a more negative experience than people just awkwardly saying something
Hmm.
weirdly positive. Another thing I like to see is when I'm out maybe at the grocery store and things like that, and children make eye contact with me or children ask questions. I'm always really pro talking to kids. I think it's actually negative when parents get all weird about it and they're like, shh, don't talk. Like,
they're like,
"No,
don't stay.
stare.
Yeah.
Don't point, don't ask questions."
Yeah.
Because I think the kids who are going to get those answers from me pleasantly are going to have a lot more warm interactions with disabled people in the future than if it's now ingrained in their heads. If their parents yank them away, they think, oh, I'm not supposed to do that. Oh, I'm not supposed to talk to disabled people, or whatever, however they process that internally. So I always feel good when a little kid approaches me or even just makes eye contact and smiles with me in those situations, because I'm hoping that in some way my positive presence and not freaking out about it or anything teaches that kid that that's okay and that they should be interacting with disabled people. So that's important. As far as the dating scene goes, I agree a lot with what Quinn said. For one thing, like, oh gosh, there's so many layers. But for one thing, like, I've had instances where I've been like texting a lot with a person and then don't know at what point do I insert this. Because in my brain for a long time, and I think I still sit on this side of the fence, is the idea that there are certain good people who, if you tell them too soon, won't want to focus on that, but will start to. Just they'll really start to fixate on it. And I really want to get them to know me as a person and to know them as a person without that factor quite yet. But then, of course, after you get to that kind of comfortable place, where do you awkwardly insert that, like, big piece of news or disclosure, if you will? And I actually had an instance where I was texting with a person for quite some time, and I finally like told them, and they had a moderately negative response in the sense that they were kind of offended that I didn't bring it up for that long. And then I had a very mixed internal battle with myself of like, should I have brought it up sooner? Like, was that on me? Is it okay for what I did? Or, have that commentary of, is there a right answer here? Because of course they have the right to feel whatever way they want to feel. But did I do this the wrong way, or is there a better way that I could have done that?
But actually that leads us to like kind of the last question. This whole interview is like intro to representation in media of cerebral palsy. So I was just wondering, like, what's your opinion of like on representation, like disability representation in general? And then if you want to go specific into representation of cerebral palsy, you can, but what's your take on that? Like, how is Hollywood doing?
I have a million thoughts. You want to go first, Lynn? You look like you have a million thoughts too.
I do. We've talked about these thoughts together in the past as well. I do kind of want to focus on Ryan O'Connell and special in general because but in general, I feel like with disability representation, it is very white, first off. And it is, I have my youngest brother, it has autism, and he's nonverbal. With that, like all of these, with autism in particular, like they never show nonverbal autistic kids at all, and my brother is nonverbal, so there's like a big lack in that, and it's always very like high functioning, like white teen boys with autism, and like they're like trying to find a girlfriend. Like it's just very like one-sided with the autism spectrum in that sense, and autism is a spectrum, and so it's having that like literally in its name, it's a spectrum, so having just like that one representation is very kind of like disappointing in my sense. And in the case of Ryan O'Connell, who I am a big fan of, the book that the TV show Special is based on, I read back in like 2015, 2016 when it first was like came out. And it was like, in that book, it's very like casual because it is like a memoir, and his attitude is very like West Hollywood gay. So it's just like very It's like very funny, and he's a very funny person.
Yeah.
And reading that book as like a 16-year-old, there was a lot of like reclaiming of terms, which was really cool to see. I've never really seen that in like media, I guess, as a whole, in books. And it was like a really awesome experience to like see somebody who was, you know, queer and disabled, like in that, like just being so open about both of those identities and like that intersection of growing up as a queer disabled person. And that was probably one of like the most authentic representations of disability that I've seen. And it was really cool. And I follow Ryan on Instagram now.
Yes.
That's like, I feel like it is a good step.
So I guess my experiences with disability in media, as I said before, the first kind of exposure I think was probably around 12 or 13 when I watched the documentary Murder Ball. But the first in, I guess, Hollywood media would have been R.D. Abrams in Glee, which was an interesting, I guess, an interesting point for me because I was a really nerdy child. So I saw both like the nerdy, like awkward qualities in addition to the disabled qualities. But of course, at this point in my life, I didn't use a wheelchair. So in a way, it felt almost, I don't know how to explain it, but almost like almost incomplete. Like there was a disabled nerd character, but it wasn't just like me. Like it wasn't semi-ambulatory, it wasn't CP. I felt like I latched onto it because I lacked any of the other characters that were closer representations to me. And then of course, as I got older and discovered that Kevin McHale, the guy who portrays Artie, wasn't disabled, like that struck me in a sad way. Like the idea of like, oh well, this character made me feel like I was represented, but like knowing more about it made me feel even more alien. I think the idea that I wasn't even being shown as authentic, I was being shown as a showpiece for someone else to act and like dress up as and pretend to be like us. And so that was a rough discovery for me. So the point, similar to Quinn's point with Special, but the point for me of like feeling good about representation happened when Speechless came out in 2016, which is about a nonverbal boy with cerebral palsy, severe cerebral palsy, who's in a power chair. And at least for me, that filled that incompleteness that R.D. Abrams left for me. I think the idea that this was an actor with cerebral palsy who used a wheelchair, and at this point I had my wheelchair as well, and who just kind of authentically discussed in a lighthearted but also really soulful way the issues that the disabled community, specifically people in his situation, deal with. And that was hugely heartwarming for me, and I felt really validated that my story was worth telling, that it was on a main network, like it was getting pretty decent reviews. People,
the main character.
Yeah, and he was a main character as opposed to just a side character. Yeah. And yeah, but the fact that like it felt really validating. But sadly, I think it came out in 2016, so I was already in university. So I longed for the idea that kids, young children who were growing up with my experiences can see, you know, these characters and feel like they're being represented well at a younger age, and have those victories. And then later on, as Quinn said, like Special came out, and what I like about Special is the fact that he's an ambulatory CP, because a lot of things, as Quinn was saying, like they represent a very specific niche of disability. Like she was saying, with autism, they represent very high functioning white boys, and as far as disability is concerned, it's frequently, you know, a paraplegic white boy. They tend to have a niche. Occasionally they'll do a person of color wheelchair user, but it's almost exclusively like paraplegic or undisclosed wheelchair user. The DSU and Disability Studies minors put on a viewing right before COVID happened of Come As You Are, which is a film focusing on the disabled experience. And the three main characters who played a power chair user, a manual chair user, and a person with a visual impairment were all played by able-bodied people. And that was one of the questions from the audience at the end, was about this representation. And the man who played the manual chair user, Hayden, is an Asian, I guess he's not American. I was going to say Asian American, but he's actually Canadian, I think. Regardless, Asian ancestry, and he talks about how over his lifetime he's gradually seen Asian representation in film, from like casting a Korean person to play a Chinese person, and like the miscasting in that way. And that kind of line in the sand of it is all representation, good representation, just to get the stories out. Like, how authentic do you have to go from point zero, and like just baby steps is what's really important. So to start getting those stories out there, as opposed to waiting for the perfect moment and the perfect casting and the perfect this and other. Because one of the points they made, because we asked about like, why did you do able-bodied casting for these characters, was the fact that it was really a producing issue. Like, they needed names of a certain caliber and a certain amount of financial backing from
to gain traction.
To gain the traction, and therefore they, I guess the implication is that they weren't going to risk it on no name, disabled, up and coming actors or what have you to play more authentic pieces.
I feel like with every group, because I can kind of speak on behalf of like the LGBT community, but that like always it feels like all TV representation for minorities starts with very caricature like stereotypes. So, like we mentioned Glee earlier, like with Glee, I feel like Kurt Hummel's character is very stereotypical, like musical theater gay. Like that is him. Like he does like, he's like at, you know, single ladies, whatever, that whole vibe. Like he's just like very. And also, I actually have recently started rewatching Glee with my roommate like a week ago, and it is like very stereotypical. Also, like even with Artie, like Artie's character, a lot of the, especially in the first season, which that was like kind of early on, so I don't know, they might have gotten better, we'll see. But like there's in the script, there's a lot of like derogatory lines towards Artie's like disability, and they just like kind of, it's just, I don't know, it's interesting. But I feel like, well, because of Glee at least having like disability in their cast, it then like made way for better TV shows, like better representation. So I feel like it does all start from this like bad-ish place of just like very stereotypical representations, but I feel like we're definitely getting there, and I feel like Special and Speechless are really good examples of accurate representation.
Okay, well, this was more than packed. This is a great interview. Thank you both of you for like sitting down with me and answering all these questions and being very open. I really appreciated it. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for Media's upcoming episode, which will cover accurate portrayals in media, specifically accurate portrayals of cerebral palsy, and we will be discussing a few shows. To name a few: Breaking Bad, Speechless, and Special.